Hello, welcome to Discern. I'm Mark Matthews, joined again by Nick Pitts with the Institute for Global Engagement. Nick, thanks again for being with us today.
So good to be with you again, Mark.
So we're going to continue down this COVID-19 journey. Lots of topics we've talked the last couple days. We'll continue to talk more about COVID-19 and how it's kind of permeated our daily life. Today we want to hit on the media and how the media has impacted, how the media has been a part of this COVID-19 story. There was an article out of the New York Times a little while ago that talks about how this is pretty specific, I think, to the United States media, but how the majority of the coverage is negative. There was a percentage, a statistic, about 87% of COVID coverage in the national U.S. media last year was negative. This, again, according to the New York Times article. It said the share was about 51% international, 53% in the U.S. regional media, and 64% in scientific journals, based on their coverage. So it's an interesting statistic, and it certainly, I think, bears out anecdotally. I feel like every time I pull up a website, whether it's a liberal-leaning website or a conservative-leaning website, the headlines are typically COVID-related, and they're typically negative. And so, Nick, do you see that same thing? What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, so there's the popular phrase, and then there's a sociological concept behind it. And so the popular phrase that many of us have probably heard is the idea that if it bleeds, it leads. That we just naturally, the saying goes that individuals just want to be presented with, and publishers want to put forward negative news. Now, there's a sociological concept behind it that's kind of rooted in science as well. It's known as our negativity bias. We typically tend to gravitate more towards negative news, and then we amplify that towards a darker view of the world. The way that negative news works and computes inside our brain takes a little bit more effort as opposed to good news or joyous news. And so it typically tends to take more of us and captivates our attention more, which in the news media, not only do you want to draw their attention, but you want to keep their attention as well. Because for every eyeball on a web page is $1 in a pocket. And so what we're seeing in the COVID news, as opposed to international audiences, is that, again, 87% of the way that they're framing what's happening during COVID is negative.
So it's interesting, you touched on this briefly, but you'd ask the question, well, why is it that these news outlets are pushing these negative narratives, these narrative storylines, when there's obviously positive things to report? And I think you touched on it. If it bleeds, it leads. One other thing mentioned in the article, as it was diving into the why, it said a quote was, human beings, particularly consumers of major media, like negativity in their stories. And it goes on to say, we think major media are responding to consumer demand. So essentially what they're saying is, we're putting it up there because that's what consumers are reading.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And so you just have to look at it if we just look at it from the subject point of what's happening during the pandemic. And so there's one side of the aisle that is typically going to underestimate the risk and the virus. And so most of their news is going to be geared towards either highlighting individuals, outliers that are amplifying it in order to make a point that they're overblown. And then another side is going to say that they're overblowing it. They're hyping it up, exaggerating the risk of the virus. And they're often going to highlight individuals that maybe aren't wearing masks or being negative towards vaccine. Just other things, other points and figures. But what we're continuing to see is that regardless of which side that you're on, Americans just by and large just aren't trusting the media, period. According to Edelman's trust barometer, what they found is that for the first time in recorded history from Edelman's standpoint, the trust of U.S. media is below 50%. 58% of Americans, according to a Gallup study, found that they believe strongly that media entities are pushing a political ideology and vision upon them. And so regardless of whatever side that you're on in this media landscape, I think we all can come to the agreement. I think a large majority of Americans are coming to the agreement that they just can't trust it.
And I think what we've also seen, in addition to the distrust in the media, but this distrust of all institutions or major institutions, especially I think as the younger generations, come through and come out of college, enter the workforce, institutions like the church, the media, the government, any of these kind of capital letter institutions, overall trust is depleting. And that can't be a good thing, I imagine.
Oh yeah, it's a really fascinating study. Edelman's does great work on their trust barometer, and what they found is that they measured and grouped all of society into 4 major industries, everything from what would be entertainment to business to nonprofit, and then to government. And what they found is, of those 4 major institutions, Americans increasingly are flocking to receive their news and trust most business, of all places. And so from a Christian standpoint, when I'm realizing I'm really discouraged, probably because Americans just don't trust the church as they once did. As an American, I'm discouraged because they're not trusting the government and following the edicts and the recommendations that are coming from government institutions. But for those that have eyes to see, what they might be able to glean is the reality that Americans are trusting their coworkers and they're trusting their business leaders in new ways. And for the vast majority of Americans, we don't work at churches, but rather we work, and these are the people that we spend upwards of 40 hours a week with. And so, it's really hard to share the good news of Jesus in a fake news world, but when you're an individual that has a chance to be able to earn the trust of your coworkers, it provides you a glorious opportunity to share about the good news when there's so much distrust that's happening.
Well, I mean, you think about how I think growing up, it was the motivation or the recommendation for evangelism was always, well, bring your friend to church. And sounds like that's probably not the best bet or not the only bet anymore. Really, we ought to be, like you're saying, it's sharing the good news, sharing the hope with those around us, because that's where most trust is if whatever trust is left, that's where it exists today.
Yeah, this pandemic has just caused so many disruptions, as so many viewers understand. It's changed our schedules. It's changed the way we plan. It's changed where we work. It's changed how we shop at the grocery store. And it's also changed who we trust and who we're looking to for news. And the good news is that what we're continuing to see is that amidst the disruption, individuals are still looking for people that they trust, and they're looking for people that are in their workplaces. And so it's not necessarily a come and see at the church, but rather it's go and die to yourself in the places you work, live, move, and have your being, and be that bright light, be that salt of the earth for the glory of God's name.
That's a great reminder. Nick, thank you so much. I'm so glad the conversation took us there today. We're going to continue talking about COVID and related topics here in the next few days. So I hope you guys are enjoying this and picking up some things you might not have thought about before. So Nick, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, and see you guys next time on Discern.